shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching State of the Nation tonight on GB News, right here with me, Matt Goodwin, the show that speaks up for you, the forgotten majority. On tonight's show, it's official, multiculturalism has failed. Almost 1 million people in this country do not speak English, according to brand new official data. Tonight, I'm going to reveal how our leaders encourage this to happen, and I'll be speaking to Reform MP Rupert Lowe right here in the studio about it. Meanwhile, President Trump has promised the American public that they are going to get tired of winning, and as President Zelensky says that he is going to sign the US deal, it does appear that President Trump has been right all along. I'll be debating, has the Liberal consensus failed, with Tobias Ellwood. As yet another deportation scam emerges, 1,500 illegal migrants have crossed the Channel in the last few days. We're going to be talking about why this means, I think, that we must leave the European Convention on Human Rights. Plus, tonight, I'll be speaking to former Mumford & Sons lead guitarist and host of the Winston Marshall podcast show about the dire state of Christianity in the UK as the Church of England's Twitter account decides to focus on net zero rather than Shrove Tuesday. That's State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, starts right now. Now, I'll also be joined tonight by my top panel, columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. As ever, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay or hit me up on X at GoodwinMJ. But now it's time for the News Bulletin with Sam Francis.
Matt, thank you very much, and good evening to you. Just after 8 o'clock, the top story tonight. The Justice Secretary is calling for new sentencing guidance to be reversed tonight, warning it risks two-tier justice. From April, judges will be advised to consider a defendant's ethnicity, culture or faith when deciding punishment, along with factors like age and pregnancy. Labour's Shabana Mahmood insists there will be no deferential treatment before the law and says she's writing to the Sentencing Council to push for a reversal. Campaigners, meanwhile, have welcomed guidance urging courts to avoid jailing pregnant women. The Sentencing Council says tailored sentences do reduce reoffending, and they say it ensures fairness. Let's bring you an update now from Cumbria, where tonight we've heard that emergency crews have rushed to Kendal Rugby Club just before 5 o'clock, where 2 children have been struck by a black BMW on a sports pitch there. One of the children sadly didn't survive. Another, we understand, is being treated by paramedics. A man in his 40s has been arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving. And police say at this stage they believe it is an isolated incident with no links to terrorism. Any more developments on that story from Cumbria we will, of course, bring to you. Well, let's turn now to some breaking news international across Greece, where riot police are tonight clashing with protesters in Athens. These live pictures show of officers firing smoke grenades and charging through the streets. Well, what began as a peaceful vigil with lanterns lighting the sky and candles forming the number 57 has now spiralled into chaos outside Greek Parliament. Demonstrators are demanding justice over Greece's deadliest train crash, which killed 57 people last year, mostly students. Tensions flared, though, as lawmakers debated earlier a censure motion against the government accused of failing to prevent the train disaster. We will keep across any developments on the streets of Athens tonight as those protests and clashes with police appear to be continuing. In other news, the US has suspended intelligence sharing with Ukraine, adding to an existing pause in military support, in a move confirmed by Trump's national security advisor and the head of the CIA. But the freeze could end. Mike Waltz says President Trump may restore military aid if Ukraine and Russia agree to peace talks. Speaking to the media, Waltz said that Trump would take a hard look at lifting the pause if negotiations move forward. And Trump himself has said he's received an important letter from Zelensky suggesting Ukraine is ready to negotiate as soon as possible. Addressing Congress last night, he claimed there are now strong signals that Russia is also ready for peace. A woman has told a court she could have been abused by more than 200 men in Rochdale, but says there was that many it was hard to keep count. The complainant, known as Girl A, says she was targeted from the age of 13, with her number passed between abusers. 8 men, former market traders and taxi drivers, are accused of preying on her and another girl, allegedly plying them with drugs and alcohol. Jurors heard that Girl A first spoke to police in 2015, blaming herself at the time, but now realises she was just a kid who, she says, knew no different. The men all deny the charges, including rape and indecent assault, and the trial continues this week. And just before I hand you back to Matt in Westminster, well, billions in spending cuts, including welfare, are expected in the Chancellor's spring statement later this month. The Treasury is submitting plans to the government's official forecaster today as concerns grow that Rachel Reeves' financial buffer has disappeared. Sources say the world has changed since October's budget, when the OBR suggested she had nearly £10 billion to spend. Those are the latest headlines. A full roundup from me at 9 o'clock here in the newsroom. Now, though, it's over to Matt.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back, everybody, to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, another shocking discovery in Britain. Get this, I could barely believe it when I read it. Nearly 1 million people in our country cannot speak English. According to official statistics, 10% of residents who were born overseas struggle to speak the English language. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that speaking the national language is the least that we need to do to have an integrated, cohesive, prosperous nation. And in many local areas in this country, as I showed this week in my newsletter, using detailed information from the census, the reality is that integration is simply not happening. Take, for example, the area of St Matthews and Highfields in Leicester. In this area, more than 80% of people who are living in social housing were born outside of the UK, of whom only around half, 52%, are currently working. According to the latest census, only 43% of people who live in that area were born in the UK. A larger number of people were born in the Middle East or Asia. 3/4 of people in that area are Muslim, and shockingly, more than 4 in every 10 people in that area are living in households that contain no adults who speak English as their main language. Or consider the area of Tockington or Monks Park near Wembley Stadium. In this area, nearly 73% of people who live in social housing were born outside of the UK, of whom only 43% are currently in work. Fully 35% of people in that area, more than 1 in 3, refuse to identify with a British or an English identity and instead choose a non-UK identity only, which is an option on the census. Fully 1/4 of people here live in households that contain no adults who speak English as their main language. Now, look, I think this is a national crisis. What is the Labour government's plan, I'm asking you? Capitulation is the answer. Labour's plan is to surrender to this phenomenon, to not do anything about it. The Labour Party's Tower Hamlets office has, in big letters on its facade, Somali and Bengali translations. Now, you might think that this ghettoisation is a natural phenomenon that comes along with mass immigration, but our leaders have actively encouraged it. I think it's time that we prioritise people from this country when distributing scarce resources like social housing. I think newcomers should be expected to work. I think they should be expected to pay tax into the collective pot. And I think they should be expected to identify with our country. And that starts with, at the bare minimum, learning our language, speaking English. I don't think our public sector institutions should be offering widespread translation services. People should learn English. As always, let me know your views at gbnews.com/yoursay or meet me on X at GoodwinMJ. With me tonight in the studio is Reform MP Rupert Lowe to discuss this, as well as my top panel, columnist and former MEP Patrick O'Flynn and founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Rupert, the fact that nearly 1 million people cannot speak English, on one level is both interesting and sad, but on another level it's telling us something about the integration story here in Britain.
Well, Matt, I couldn't have put it better in your introduction myself. I mean, I think what you said I completely agree with. I've been talking about this through my social media accounts for some time now. And I think, multiculturalism has failed. There's no doubt about that. And these numbers just confirm it. And there are other numbers that we're digging into, which I think will confirm it even further. But the first condition of coming here must be that you speak English. How can you be of any economic benefit to the country if you can't speak our language? I'm very strong on the fact that if you come here, you must speak English. I got my bowel cancer test the other day, and it was translated into about sort of 60 languages. Number one, as you know, we've been exposing how much this translation costs. We shouldn't be paying for that. If you come here, you learn English. And if you can't speak English, then you actually have to pay for your own translation, or you have to use Google or Amazon Translate. So I think integration cannot work unless people speak the language. I have a very strong view on the 85 Sharia courts that we have here, which, again, I think stops integration. And I'm happy for people to come, but they've got to abide by our laws, they've got to speak our language, they've got, as you say, to make an economic contribution to Britain. And what's happened is, for many years now, the government ignores its tax-paying citizens who basically drive our economy and have contributed over many, many years and generations. They're the ones who should be respected. They're the ones who should be at the top of the agenda. Now, if these people come here because they want to come and live with us, and they can contribute because they've got skills we haven't got, and they integrate, as far as I'm concerned, they're very welcome. But not people who don't want to learn our language and live by our laws.
Can I ask, just before turning to the panel, where do you think, Rupert, it went wrong when it comes to language? When do you think it became acceptable in Britain to not learn the national language, to not actually integrate at that basic level?
Well, I think, Matt, a lot of this stuff, if you look, Maggie, who I think left us with a very powerful economic legacy, and actually the country was at peace with itself when Maggie left. We had immigration was relatively sort of continuous at around, I think, net 50,000, something like that, and it was properly run. So I think it always comes back in the end to the Blair, Brown, Campbell and Mandelson axis. Not only did they pass a load of malign legislation, such as we know, the Human Rights Act, and you're quite right about the ECHR, which, as you know, is embedded into the HRA. The Equalities Act, another vile and divisive piece of legislation. It all goes back, and Derry Irvine, let's not forget that wretched individual. They almost passed legislation that I think, in many ways, it confused and ruined Britain. And I think the disappointing thing is Boris, when he had an 80-seat majority, didn't repeal a lot of this malign legislation and return Britain to being what it should be.
Aaron, as a man of the left, I mean, even I suspect you can see there is a fundamental problem in a society where you don't have that basic level of integration through language, surely.
Well, I love the English language, to start with. I love English literature. I love its everyday vernacular use. I love the more sort of academic side of it, which, of course, the left is very comfortable with academic English. And I think the basic point here that you cannot have a political entity, a national community, without a shared means of communicating with one another is obvious. It's inarguable. The data is interesting. So of those 1 million people, about 800,000 speak a little English. Functionally, it may not be enough to work, but a little conversational English. And then you've got about 200,000 people who can't speak any English. I would say of those 200,000 people, that is not good. And that absolutely has to be addressed. I would hope of the other 800,000, they're on a path to trying to improve their ability to speak the language, written and, oral. What I'd also add, however, is the Tories were in charge for 14 years. And often in the reporting of this stuff, it's presented as either it started yesterday or it's the consequence of the Blair-Brown supremacy.
Everybody clearly has failed on this.
It's remarkable. There are so many things, Matthew. I look at where this country was in 2010. I don't think we had 1 million people who couldn't speak English in this country. And if they couldn't, they had access to adult education, which maybe we disagree upon, which is not there right now. So I think something like this might be quite a right-coded conservative talking point. Well, my goodness, the Conservative Party, and I'm not suggesting you think otherwise, the Conservative Party have a huge amount of responsibility.
I'm certainly not here to defend the Conservative Party.
It happens very occasionally. I kind of agree with Aaron's points here, right? I think Rupert was quite lenient on the Tory administrations, even going back to Margaret Thatcher. My view is that almost ever since Enoch Powell and Rivers of Blood, the Conservative Party has been frightened of demanding muscular measures on integration, being serious about immigration control. I think there are waves and waves and generations of people who have come particularly from cultures where women are disempowered, where there's been no insistence that everyone in the household learns English at all. The other thing I find fascinating on these latest figures is we've lived in a climate for years where the left, mainly the academic left, has always gone on about data, and it's saying you right-wing people, you're prejudiced, you're knee-jerk, you're just spouting pub talk. And now we're getting data dribbling out, which shows that the right-wing critique of mass immigration has been right in every regard, whether it's to do with economic contribution, non-aligned cultures, non-English people, speakers, welfare dependency, social housing stock. So the data backs up the right analysis.
So Rupert, what's the answer to this? Because when I look through the census, as I mentioned for the piece that I was writing this week, I was personally quite shocked at the number of people who are rejecting an association with Britishness, with Englishness, and who are also living in households where no adults are speaking English. What's the answer to this social integration problem?
Well, I mean, I think, again, Matt, I've been very clear that obviously illegal means illegal. So if people come here illegally, I don't accept that they should be planted across the country in hotels that the government's clearly incapable of running.
And legal immigration?
They're having their faces taken off. Well, illegal immigration is a more difficult issue, Matt, but that's a historical legacy that we've got. I think we have to start with the illegal migration and curb that. I think we have to start with the foreign criminals who are in our prisons, who I think they should be sent back to their countries. We have, various treaties with countries which we're not using. So, again, it's an abuse of the taxpayer. I don't believe people should be able to come here. I personally think they should be here contributing and paying tax for 10 years before we accept them as part of the British fabric.
Yeah, which is certainly one of the reforms we could do to things like indefinite leave to remain, which is we don't allow people to stay permanently unless they show us 10 years of tax returns. Well, thank you to my panel. Thank you to Rupert Lowe, Reform MP. After the break, Donald Trump promised Americans last night they would be tired of winning. But is he on the cusp of his biggest win yet? Find out in just a moment.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletin's here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Now, Egypt has discovered, well, I think it was a British and Egyptian team, actually, finding the historic discovery, the long-lost tomb of King Thutmose II, the last of the lost tombs of the kings of ancient Egypt's 18th dynasty.
Yes, and it's the first royal Egyptian tomb to be discovered since King Tutankhamun's final resting place was found in 1922.
A very exciting discovery, and here to tell us all about it is the historian and author Martin Whittock. Martin, the first royal tomb since Tutankhamun.
Indeed, indeed, and identified as King Thutmose II. Other pronunciations are also available. And as you say, it's the last of the lost tombs of Egypt's 18th dynasty. They ruled between about 1550 BC and 1292 BC. It had been known before this tomb since 2022 as Tomb C4, as its occupant was then unknown. But what's happened now is parts of alabaster vessels have been found which have inscriptions bearing the name of Pharaoh Thutmose II and identifying him as the deceased king, along, interestingly, with the name of his wife, Hatshepsut. Now, she's an interesting woman because after he died, she ruled as pharaoh in her own right, one of only 2 women to do so in ancient Egyptian history. Now, the mummy of King Thutmose II was actually discovered during the 19th century at a nearby archaeological site known as Deir el-Bahari Kashet, and it's thought it was moved there after it had been looted by tomb raiders centuries ago. So the tomb is not going to give us the kind of treasures that we associate with Tutankhamun, I'm afraid, but it shows us the architecture of these royal tombs.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, everybody, to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, right here on GB News. Now, last night, in a seminal speech, Donald Trump said that Ukraine is prepared to begin peace negotiations as soon as possible, with strong signs that Russia is also now open to a deal. Addressing Congress, the US president read aloud a letter that he said was from Ukraine's leader, President Zelensky, echoing a message shared on X earlier in the day. Check this out.
Today I received an important letter from President Zelensky of Ukraine. The letter reads, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time that is convenient for you. I appreciate that he sent this letter, just got it a little while ago. Simultaneously, we've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be beautiful?
Now, this could be a real turning point in their rocky relationship after Donald Trump froze military aid to Ukraine, accusing Zelensky of being ungrateful following their box office, Oval Office clash last week. Well, I'm joined now in the studio by former chairman of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, just to talk about the latest developments in America. Tobias, on one level, this is clearly about Ukraine. This is about how we get to that peace deal and whether the letter from Zelensky is going to be enough, whether we're going to get this deal on minerals. I think that's one thing certainly we want to talk about. But at a deeper level, I just want to throw this question at you. I mean, when I was watching Trump's speech yesterday, it struck me that actually what we're seeing is not just a new position or the carving out of a position on the war in Ukraine. We are seeing a pushback to what we might call the liberal international consensus that has dominated geopolitics for the last 30 years, that has been basically a bit more interventionist, has been a bit more focused on a rules-based order. Trump seems to be just throwing all of that up into the air.
Absolutely right. And we're not sure where this is going to go. Many people have said, judge Trump on his actions, not his words. But there's enough pieces of the jigsaw that we can put together. Going back to the Munich Security Conference, when the vice president said, Russia's not the problem, Europe's problem is from within. That was the first, if you like, warning light that came out. And then we've got this narrative going in Washington, D.C., that Zelensky is the dictator, not Putin. And this desire to sort of bring Russia in from the cold. Then you see Donald Trump announcing that after those terrible scenes that we saw in the White House he just referred to, he's got a letter from Zelensky, willing to come back to the United States, but on top of that, then stops the intelligence sharing, stops the military aid. This can only support one person, one country, and that's Putin. And we know from where we sit that they remain very much, Russia is the enemy. He will not stop with a deal in Ukraine. He wants all of it. He doesn't see Ukraine as a country, but as a part of the Russia's motherland. So then we see Trump saying, I'm going to reach out to Putin. We're going to have discussions in the desert in Saudi Arabia, but Ukraine can't be involved. And by the way, if we do get a deal, America and indeed NATO will not be part of any peacekeeping operation. When you add all this together, as your question implies, are we seeing something rather more sinister taking place? And I worry about this. I'm a dual national. I was born in America. I was at the inauguration. I wanted Trump to come in and shake things up a bit. Things had got very slow under Biden. The war was dragging on. America was too risk averse. This was an opportunity to move things forward. But we're now seeing America side with Russia. And as you mentioned, this global order, is Trump moving away from this and then treating the world very much as an absence of any order, but now with big beasts in it, if you like, where you've got Russia, China and America, each with their zone of influence?
Isn't the pushback to that actually we've had 30 years of liberal world order, liberal globalism, interventionism, whatever you want to call it, that basically oversaw a succession of major failures from Iraq to Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and that actually what we need now is something that is fundamentally different from what we had over the last 30 years. And say what you want about Trump, whether you like him, whether you loathe him, but he's basically forced Zelensky back to the negotiation table. He's clearly going to get this minerals deal. That's clearly going to commit the US to be on the ground in some form, shape or other. Economic partnership, we'll call it an economic partnership, but it's probably going to be something much more substantive behind the scenes. I mean, Trump is winning this. He's getting what he wants, isn't he? I mean, Trump, basically, contrary to what the Europeans are saying, I mean, Trump is running the show.
Well, let's divide it into two. Firstly, the scenarios that you painted over the last 30 years, I would actually argue that those were interventions that you could, of choice. We chose to go into...
bad choices.
Bad choices, but that's ours. That's the West's decision. Ultimately, the last 30 years, this generation that's grown up in the last 30 years has enjoyed relative peace. I'm old enough, I think you're younger, that remember the Cold War. Remember that actually our world is normally at some form of war, at conflict somewhere. This last 30 years has been pretty good. Yes, there have been exceptions. Those areas that you mentioned, Libya, you could add Somalia, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq. We've wandered into these places, then somehow lost the political will to continue. And guess where the migration is now actually coming from? So there's absolutely right that we've chose ourselves. That's nothing to do with what's happening across the world now. Separate to all this, the world is splintering into two from where I sit. China, other authoritarian states are offering another alternative vision of where our global order should go. And suddenly we've got usually the leader of the West saying, absolutely, I'm happy now to throw away any sense of duty that I've had for the last 80 years to support the global order. And I'm happy for everybody just to look after themselves. And to finish that...
But in fairness, is Trump really saying that? Because the way I read him, he's not saying that. What I hear when I listen to Donald Trump is, what he's saying to Europeans is, you can't be free riders anymore. You have to increase defence spending. You've made disastrous decisions on energy. You've become too reliant on Russia. You've had these enormous welfare regimes. You've had too much migration, predominantly from Middle East and Northern Africa. What he's saying to Europe, and what J.D. Vance said in Munich, is you've got to get your house in order.
Well, he didn't say it in so many words. I was there in the room. And you're absolutely right on all those points. And I've been one in not this studio, but other studios, calling for an increase in spending because I know that we're entering a new era of insecurity. The trouble is that what his solution is actually what Putin wants. And if we allow Putin to claim any form of victory and America is not involved in some form of security for Ukraine, Putin will rearm, regroup and do this all again.
But we're not going to have that scenario, are we? We're going to have a minerals deal. We're going to have the US on the ground economically.
Let's separate the two.
So so the dream outcome here for you is what?
Well,
How do you end the war?
Firstly, let's separate the two because Trump has made it clear there will be no US troops in Ukraine, any form of peace deal. So again, he is dialing back from security in Europe. He wants a minerals deal, and that's the more, that's the relationship that he's now having with Europe. Everything's about the deal, about what's best for America. America is now treating the world, or Trump is, that, as I say, it's almost like it's chaotic, it's a jungle, but there are big beasts out there, and we're going to be one of them. Another predator with our zone of influence, and that includes Panama, includes Greenland, includes Canada, and Russia's got their own zone of influence, and that includes Ukraine. Sorry, Ukraine, but we're not going to support you.
Well, it's certainly not going to go anywhere anytime soon. I think America First looks to be here for a while. Thank you, Tobias Elwood, for sharing his comments with us tonight. Now, in a moment, you're not going to believe how many people have entered Britain illegally, crossing the Channel in the small boats in the last few days alone. After the break, I'm going to reveal the number. You're not going to believe it. And exactly how we can stop this from happening, I'll be talking to my panel in just a moment.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Whilst high pressure in the south of the UK brings sunshine, it will turn increasingly unsettled for Iberia, although mostly fine for Italy and for much of Greece, albeit with a keen breeze through the Greek islands into Thursday. There'll also be a freshening breeze through Sicily and some outbreaks of rain turning up here. But the most unsettled weather will be Iberia, particularly Portugal, through the rest of the week and into the weekend. Some heavy downpours, thunderstorms and strengthening winds.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, because the failure is you're deliberately avoiding my point.
Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes and Kerr weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
I ended up being hospitalised, and I was diagnosed with it within the first few days of being in hospital. I was in hospital for 2 months, and I came out about 13 months ago, something like that. And I realised that there are people that aren't as lucky as me that don't have that platform to be able to talk about it, bring it out in the public, and deal with the stigma, because there is still a stigma.
What? A lot of people don't really know what bipolar is. So in you, Heston, how did it manifest itself?
It's funny because before the diagnosis, I mean, everything, many things, from thinking the TV was talking to me to hallucinating stuff. The downside is suicidal thoughts, which seemed normal at the time. The upside is the thing, there's grandiosity, somewhere between Superman and Jesus Christ. Wow. Save the world, love everybody, everything is fantastic. And then it comes crashing down. It's a bit like a toddler, you know, an overexcited child. And when a kid gets overexcited, and then something happens, and then they start crying.
Wow. So massive highs, big lows.
Yeah, but I thought everything was normal. It's only now that I've come out the other side, so to speak, that I look back and can see some of the character traits. I mean, my patience levels were almost non-existent before. I'm a lot more patient. I'm talking much slower. I was talking very quickly.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, earlier today, GB News exclusively revealed that more than 1,300 illegal migrants, not irregular migrants, illegal migrants, have crossed the English Channel over the last 5 days, casting huge doubt over Labour's policy of smash the gangs. This takes a total number of illegal migrants who have arrived since 2018 to over 150,000. But on the subject of asylum, it emerged today that an Albanian drug dealer, get this, an illegal migrant, has dodged deportation after judges ruled that his daughter, this guy, remember, established a cannabis drug factory, but judges ruled that his daughter needed a male role model in her life. As ever, all roads lead back to the ECHR and the Human Rights Act, which this particular criminal used to avoid deportation. Now, we're only going to solve these problems with the channel crossings, with deportations, if we actually leave the ECHR and repeal this legislation altogether. To discuss this, I'm joined now by former Chief Immigration Officer at UK Border Force, Kevin Saunders. Kevin, welcome to the show. Now, like many people out there who have been reading the newspapers over the last month, I've been shocked, appalled, outraged by the cases, the number of cases that we've been reading of people who are in Britain illegally. We can't deport them. They routinely use the ECHR, their right to a family life, their human rights to avoid deportation. So I just want to ask you a very direct question here. How can the British people stop this from happening?
Good evening. Well, the answer is quite simple. We leave the ECHR. We should have left it ages ago, but the government won't. So until the government do this, we're going to be stuck with these ridiculous decisions that are occurring in immigration tribunals.
Right. And within those tribunals, just help me figure something out for a second. So we have UK judges who are basically saying, well, look, we can't deport this lady from the Caribbean who overstayed her visa because her Latvian husband might find the Caribbean too hot, or he might not like Caribbean food, which was actually a real case. Are they drawing more on the ECHR today, or are they drawing more on UK laws, legislation that was passed under New Labour? Is it a combination of the both? I mean, just walk us through that. Walk us through that if you can.
It's the European law. It's the European Convention on Human Rights that they're doing it, and you've got to remember that the immigration judges are not the judges that you would see if you robbed a bank or something like that. They're not. They're a different type of judge, and they purely sit on immigration cases. So you would have thought that they would have been experts, wouldn't you? But some of the decisions that they're coming up with are strange, to say the least.
I mean, if I could just ask you a quick question. I mean, you talk about strange decisions. A number of drug dealers recently, Jamaica, Albania, they've been in the UK. They've been destroying British families' lives by dealing crack, cocaine, heroin. I feel particularly strongly about this, knowing people who have been drawn into drug addiction and the absolute chaos that is caused among British families. Yet they use the ECHR and they appeal to their right to a family life, whereas I'm left asking the question, well, what about the right that British families have to a family life? So why on earth are these judges not putting British families, British parents, British mums and dads first? I can't understand this.
Well, this is because this is the judge's interpretation of the legislation. Now, the case you've just cited about the drug dealer, he claimed on the basis that his daughter needed a male figure in her life. They didn't say she needed a male figure in her life in the UK. So this man could have been removed. And if it was so important that he had his daughter with him, she could have gone with him.
Well, why don't we just deport them all? I mean, it's a good question. Let me just bring in the panel, Patrick O'Flynn. I mean, every week we're here discussing an insane case of somebody being allowed to stay in the UK and using the ECHR. And for me, it's this balance between protecting criminals who are appealing to the ECHR, their right to a family life, but at the same time consistently undermining the right of British people to a peaceful, stable family life. And these judges just seem to be away with the birds.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is a necessary but not sufficient condition to bail out of the ECHR. We also need to leave certain United Nations compacts and either to scrap or greatly amend the Human Rights Act. Perhaps it could become a Citizens' Rights Act and not one for illegal immigrants too. But I think further than that, the immigration judiciary, as your guest has been hinting, I think a lot of them are former immigration lawyers, defence, like keeping people in the country. They're obviously massively, as a cohort, liberally biased. I would like to see us abolish the whole immigration tribunal system and make it just an executive power of government that our British elected government and our ministers, the Home Secretary, whoever, if they say that a foreign national's presence is not conducive to the public good, we should be able to remove that person without any rights of appeal to left-wing judges whatsoever. Get rid of it.
Sounds good to me. Aaron?
You know, I'm a bit of a softie. And on this particular story, I don't think it's as bad as some of the other ones you've raised. I don't think, for instance, cannabis is as detrimental to the public good as things like heroin, crack cocaine, etc.
Do you think people should be allowed to build cannabis factories in their home?
No, but he's going to serve a prison sentence for that. And he
also entered the country illegally.
I think the point for me is that there's a British national who's the child who does need a father. Now, I strongly believe in families. I totally see the argument that he should leave. I don't think it's as open and shut as some of the other cases you've raised in recent weeks, purely because there's a young girl who needs ideally a family. Now, she's been let down by her father. He should have thought about all of this before he did what he did. But I would also understand, I'd be sympathetic to a judge who would say we shouldn't be punishing the child for the sins of the father. I don't know where I stand on this, but I don't feel it's as open and shut maybe as some of the other cases you highlight.
But this is reaching boiling point out there in the country, because we've got the worst cost of living crisis since the Second World War. The British people out there, the taxpayers watching this show, are spending $5.5 billion at least every year on this broken asylum system. And they're reading cases like this day in, day out. Today it's the Albanian cannabis factory creator. Last week it was the Jamaican Class A drug dealer. The week before that it was the criminal whose child didn't want to eat foreign chicken nuggets. I mean, the whole thing's become insane. Even you must recognise that this status quo isn't working. We need to leave the ECHR. We need to do whatever it takes to regain control over our borders and our streets.
So the ECHR is a really fascinating one. And it's often viewed as kind of totemic, as something the left should defend, as is, for instance, the Supreme Court in this country. This venerable institution which has existed since 2009-10. We were a democracy before then, so presumably we could be a democracy.
I think the Supreme Court should go. I think much of Blair's legislative legacy should go.
Quite. So Britain was a democracy. It was a successful, prosperous country before many of these things existed. One can therefore infer it would be all of those things if we weren't necessarily in those institutions. I would still add, though, even if we weren't in the ECHR, I can still see a world where a sympathetic judge, even a small c conservative judge, might say to that chap, the Albanian cannabis guru entrepreneur, I can see a world where he gives him a second chance. I can.
Patrick, do you think, I mean, Reform are campaigning to leave the ECHR. Do you think this is going to become a very big issue at the next general election? It feels to me like this is the next Brexit.
It does to me too, and Rishi Sunak gave an interview today where he expressed his regrets over the small boats issue, but he didn't regret not stopping the boats. He regretted promising to stop the boats. But even he said, if the ECHR will not reform, we need to leave. Now, he didn't set a deadline on that, and of course, if he was in power, he'd be far too cowardly to see it through. But nonetheless, even an establishment Conservative figure like Sunak is starting to admit the game's up.
I look forward to the Conservative Party committing to leave the ECHR. Watch this space. Thank you to my panel. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be speaking to former Mumford & Sons lead guitarist Winston Marshall, also host of The Winston Marshall Show, about the decline of Christian institutions in the UK. You're going to want to catch this. I'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It stays clear in the south overnight, but with an increased southerly breeze there'll be less frost and fog around, and it will also turn less wet and windy across northern parts of the UK. We've got a transition period with our weather systems. It's been unsettled in the far north and it continues to stay that way across the north of Scotland, some parts of southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight, wet and windy weather continuing, but it does eventually turn drier from the south as southerly winds begin to turn up. Now, that increased southerly wind will prevent widespread frost and fog in the south, so a little less chilly first thing in parts of England and Wales, and most places will enjoy sunny skies during the morning. In fact, brighter skies are expected across central and southern Scotland with more cloud breaks about, but it continues to be wet and breezy in the far north of Scotland. Northern Ireland, a lot of cloud, but again here, something a little brighter is starting to emerge. For much of England and Wales, it's clear blue skies, but the first signs of a change on the way there for southwest England with a build of medium-level cloud. And through the morning into the afternoon, whilst we keep the sunny skies across the Midlands, eastern England, eastern Scotland, we'll see thickening cloud further west, and by the end of the afternoon, some showery rain into parts of Wales. Meanwhile, the rain pulls away from the north of Scotland, drier and brighter here and feeling warmer everywhere, temperatures reaching 16 to 17 or even 18 Celsius in the east. Now, the showers that I mentioned in the west by the end of Thursday move across much of England and Wales, parts of southeast Scotland on Friday, so a cloudier picture, more showers around, but also some breaks, some drier spells, and that marks a change into the weekend. It's going to turn drier in the north, but more showery further south, whilst it's warmer everywhere.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun. No, he didn't say that, Dave. I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, does anybody else out there feel like me that they're going absolutely crazy? Yeah. Yesterday was, of course, Shrove Tuesday, a day of feasting and preparation before Lent. But what does the Church of England decide to pay homage to online? Net zero, of all things. What else? While our leaders bend over backwards to accommodate Ramadan, does it seem as though Christian commemorations and festivities are being forgotten, even by the very institutions that are meant to be their key purveyors? Now, I'm joined tonight by the host of the Winston Marshall Show. If you've not checked it out online, please do. It's available on YouTube and other platforms. Winston Marshall is here with me. Winston, lots of people watching this show are asking themselves a question. When it comes to Christian festivities, important marks in a calendar, important dates in a calendar, those things are often overlooked in favour of minority religions, alternative celebrations and moments in the calendar. We've seen, for example, the celebration of Ramadan in some of the most important institutions in this country. What's your take on this? Are we seeing a sort of two-tier approach now when it comes to religion?
Well, look, if you follow this story online, you see a lot of people upset about, let's say, the Ramadan lights that have been put across London through the holy season of Lent. They are upset by witnessing King Charles, who is head of the Church of England, hosting, although I'm not sure he was there, at Windsor Castle, some Ramadan events, various iftar events. They see Sir Keir Starmer at Parliament hosting iftar. But this is, of course, Lent. Today, Ash Wednesday. Yesterday was Shrove Tuesday. But before getting annoyed with, let's say, the sort of, or maybe framing it as a two-tier thing. I look at the Church of England, and I have absolutely no pleasure in saying this, but frankly, today the Church of England are an abomination. And I say this, I watched this video, you've just shown a clip of it. This is on Shrove Tuesday, where they post nothing else on social media about Shrove Tuesday, nothing about shriving, about repenting sins before Lent, nothing about the British Christian tradition of Pancake Day. Instead, they do this 2.5-minute video where they say they want climate justice. They have put through the video lies. There's actual lies in the video. They say that there's 100%, they need to have 100% renewable energies. There's no such thing as 100% renewable energies. They say they want climate justice. This language, instead of taking the language of Holy Scripture, they're taking the language of what essentially is postmodernist, progressive, kind of neo-Marxist ideologues. And so who can really blame these other minority groups for forgetting that Britain is a Christian country, and we are a Christian country? Who could blame even the British for forgetting that we're a Christian country when the leaders of our church themselves seem to have forgotten about it? And that's why it's so upsetting.
Now, some people out there would say that the church's embrace of things like net zero is about demonstrating its relevance and its adaptation to the dominant culture of our time.
Look, if you want to do some recycling, have a compost heap, fill your boots. That's fantastic. If you're worried about your own personal carbon footprint, fill your boots. The problem is twofold. On the one hand, Christians are commanded. The greatest commandment is love thy God above all else. And the Church of England, I mean, quite literally last year, they were touring an art exhibition called Gaia. This is a literal pagan god. So that's one problem, is that their priorities are out of whack. The other problem is that they are spending a lot of money on net zero folly, which I believe is net zero folly. For example, they, in 2023, announced $190 million on top of a previous $30 million, pounds, on net zero policy, climate policies and different, schemes in their diocese. They have, the majority of dioceses now have a diocesan environmental officer, and hot on the heels of the diocesan environmental officers are the net zero carbon officers. Now, the problem with all the money, it's their money, they can spend it, right? The problem is we, the taxpayer, via the government, are putting money through organisations like Historic England in funding for the restoration of church buildings. Now, they might say it's a duty as a Christian to be custodians of the land, of the environment, but it's also the duty to be custodians of your budget. And why should working people in Britain pay for the buildings of the churches? Meanwhile, the church is spending ridiculous sums on what I believe is a politically motivated, I guess you would say, folly.
So essentially, you're saying the church, like other institutions in society, has been captured by a political project. It's being imposed top-down on everybody else. I suppose my question is, what do you think has caused this? Is it that the leaders of the church have themselves radicalised, have embraced this kind of progressive, some might say woke agenda? Is it being caused by something else within the church? And lots of people watching this show tonight will agree with everything you said and will say, well, look, I'm a Christian, I'm sick of it. What should those people do?
It's hard to fully understand what's happened with the church, but it seems to be, the environmental aspect is just one tenet of a kind of corpus of progressive political ideas that have got metastasized through the church. You'll remember after 2020, they were quite literally genuflecting in honour of George Floyd and the Marxist Black Lives Matter organisation. If you go on the Church of England website, they're open about everything they do. They have statements supporting trans ideology. This is a whole sort of a school of thought. But why exactly where these ideas came from, how they had the success in penetrating so much of the church, so much of the General Synod, I'm not entirely sure, but it seems to be a problem that's happened since after the war.
But we've got an ideological revolution that's taking place, and I don't think that's going to go anywhere anytime soon. Thank you to Winston Marshall. Do check out his show, The Winston Marshall Show, please, online. Up next is Patrick Christys. Patrick, what have you got on your show tonight?
Yes, great show, Matt. Loads coming up. So anti-white racism appears to be alive and well in Britain. People were called dangerous conspiracy theorists for believing in two-tier justice, but now we have unequivocal proof that it exists. It's also been a record few days in the Channel. What are our leaders doing about it? Are they too busy celebrating Ramadan to sort out illegal migration? Hugh Edwards is still refusing to pay back his salary. What are the Beeb doing about that? And why are a majority of women in Britain scared of men their own age?
Well, splendid stuff, Patrick. That's all coming up after the weather. Now, I'm going to be back right here tomorrow night, 8 p.m. on State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin, right here on GB News. We're going to be speaking up for you, the forgotten majority. I'll see you right here tomorrow.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It stays clear in the south overnight, but with an increased southerly breeze, there'll be less frost and fog around, and it will also turn less wet and windy across northern parts of the UK. We've got a transition period with our weather systems. It's been unsettled in the far north, and it continues to stay that way across the north of Scotland, some parts of southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland overnight. Wet and windy weather continuing, but it does eventually turn drier from the south as southerly winds begin to turn up. Now, that increased southerly wind will prevent widespread frost and fog in the south, so a little less chilly first thing in parts of England and Wales, and most places will enjoy sunny skies during the morning. In fact, brighter skies are expected across central and southern Scotland with more cloud breaks about, but it continues to be wet and breezy in the far north of Scotland. Northern Ireland, a lot of cloud, but again here, something a little brighter is starting to emerge. For much of England and Wales, it's clear blue skies, but the first signs of a change on the way there for southwest England with a build of medium-level cloud. And through the morning into the afternoon, whilst we keep the sunny skies across the Midlands, eastern England, eastern Scotland, we'll see thickening cloud further west, and by the end of the afternoon, some showery rain into parts of Wales. Meanwhile, the rain pulls away from the north of Scotland, drier and brighter here and feeling warmer everywhere, temperatures reaching 16 to 17 or even 18 Celsius in the east. Now, the showers that I mentioned in the west by the end of Thursday move across much of England and Wales, parts of southeast Scotland on Friday, so a cloudier picture, more showers around, but also some breaks, some drier spells, and that marks a change into the weekend. It's going to turn drier in the north, but more showery further south, whilst it's warmer everywhere.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you could be one of two big winners in our latest giveaway, as we have two prize bundles that have to be won. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. Hurry, lines close on the 7th of March. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hello everyone, Patrick Christys here with an exclusive opportunity just for you, our incredible GB News viewers. We're giving you the opportunity to win a VIP studio tour right here at GB News HQ. Plus, You'll also get to meet yours truly. It's easy to enter. Just head to gbnews.com/community competition and follow the easy steps. Don't miss out. Enter now, and I'll see you soon at GB News. Full T's and C's apply.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash,